Hey, Nashville, Beau Beach here. Welcome back to the podcast. As always, it's our job on the podcast to catch you up on the past few weeks of commercial real estate news. We shoot the podcast for our clients and prospective clients. You know, it's very difficult to keep your finger on the pulse when we've got so much going on in Nashville. So we hope that we're solving part of that problem for you all. We're going to cover about 10 different stories. As we cover them, I'm going to kind of layer in some insider knowledge that I think you might appreciate. And perhaps at the end of the podcast, you all will have a better understanding of kind of where we are in the market today, which leads me into the first story, which I think is super informative, right? Because it's profiling some of the heaviest hitters, not only in Nashville, but nationally. And these are folks that bought very expensive land in 2021 and 2022. And as we find ourselves about to enter the second half of 2026, these projects have still stalled out. These are the best of the best that have been unable to get a shovel in the ground for most of these projects. So we've got a lot of their feedback here. I'm going to tell you some of the stories of the most high profile projects in Nashville and why they have totally and completely stalled out and where we go from here. So this is a quote coming from the CEO of the Congress Group, right? This will all make sense as we get going, so just bear with me. Quote, "For me and my partners, this has been the most frustrating 18 to 24 months we've experienced in our 40-year career." So the heaviest hitters are saying this has been the most frustrating stretch of time in the last 40 years, which is kind of a big thing to say, right? You know, he paid an eye-popping price, $35 million for his downtown development site in 2022. His Four Seasons Tower was nearing completion a few blocks away, with condo pre-sales surpassing expectations. He wanted to build three more towers, right? So this is the guy that got the Four Seasons done, which is a unbelievable project. Interest rates were low, construction prices were steady, and Nashville was hotter than ever in the years following the onset of the COVID pandemic. Then, what veteran developer Mark Bloom calls the perfect storm happened. Quote, rising interest rates, spiking oil and energy prices, commodity pricings moving up substantially, labor is more expensive. All of these make it really difficult to develop aspirational, large budget commercial real estate projects, he said. And a lot of the development sites got ahead of themselves. They traded at really aggressive levels, meaning prices, right? They traded at very aggressive prices that are proving difficult to pencil out to develop in today's environment. Developers have responded by pushing the brakes on many of the city's biggest development projects. Some have adjusted their project plans. Others have resorted to putting their extensive and expensive properties back on the market. The capital markets are reacting by doing nothing. And when capital markets do nothing, developers die, right? So a lot to take in here. Let's just keep going with some of these quotes. We're all products of the capital market. We have to raise equity. We have to raise debt. We're all getting our heads beat in based on the uncertainty in the market today. And there's no clear end in sight. Nobody knows how long it's going to take to what was received back then as normal. Eventually, we will surpass levels that we saw back in 21 and 22, but it could be the end of the decade, or it could be the middle of the next decade, right? So developers got ahead of themselves in 21 and 22 and paid sky-high prices for dirt on which to build very vertical developments, right? So the only way to pay the price that they paid for the dirt back then was you've got to have a lot of square footage. And how do you get square footage out of small, relatively small sites? You go vertical as high as you can, right? So these are very, very expensive buildings to get out of the ground. Let's look back at several big projects that were pitched during Nashville's boom years and where they stand now, right? And the reason I think this is informative is not because one needs to really memorize all the details of somebody else's developments, but it speaks to where we are in terms of land value in Nashville. There's no harder asset class out there today than overpriced land, right? So if you are someone that's kind of scanning the marketplace for opportunities and you've got your eye on land, I'm sure you can appreciate how much land is available and also kind of scratch your head at some of the prices, right? So lots of sellers are still trying to get 21 and 22 prices, and there are very few buyers that are even capable of developing at those prices. The money just is not there to finance these projects. You've got to remember, developers, not only do they go out and borrow bank debt, but then the equity piece, right? So the down payment. So let's imagine the bank is going to put 75% of the loan, 75% of the deal. Well, the buyer still has to bring in the 25% down payment. But these developers aren't bringing that down payment themselves. They're going out and getting what's called equity investors, right? Equity investors are putting that down payment together. So they've got to go out, not only tie up the property, then they've got to go out and borrow the money, and then they've got to go out and also sign up those equity investors. And you've got all of these moving pieces. And if you can't get the capital stack, right, which is the debt and the equity stack figured out, there's no way that these projects are going to get done. And what these folks are saying is capital is just sitting on the sidelines, scared, waiting it out. And that's the reason that these projects are not getting developed. Right. So let's go through some of these high profile projects very quickly, and then we'll keep moving. Circle South by Lincoln Property Company, 2020, a 30-story, 535,000 square foot office tower that would be one of the largest office developed in the city if it were standing today. This is on Korean Veterans Boulevard roundabout. They paid more than $40 million for the dirt. They have plans for a 19-story apartment tower that was added to the project in 2021. The latest, no permits have been issued for the project since 2022. Metal fencing surrounds the empty lot where no physical progress has been made. $40 million in dirt sitting there for years with no progress made to date. Another project, Mid-City Nashville by GBT Realty. This was a 2021 deal. They paid an astronomical $110 million for Lee Beeman's 8-acre Broadway site. They planned a 7-tower mixed-use development there with residential, office, and hotel space. The latest, while they did begin demolition of the property in 2024, construction fencing surrounds the site today, but no physical movement has been made since the demolition began. Carrying $110 million of land since 2021 is unbelievable how that's even possible. Reed District by Hines. This is a 2021 project. The purchase of a portion of Jim Reed's former Midtown dealership property. They paid $32 million. They planned a 2.7 million square foot project with 8 towers, including office space, apartments, a hotel, and adaptive reuse of the vintage Coca-Cola plant. The latest, Hines has abandoned its plans for the Reed District project and has relisted the prime Midtown property for sale. These are the heaviest hitters, not only in Nashville, but nationally. Can't get these projects out of the ground. And you think you're going to overprice your land, and you think they're going to be buyers lined up to buy overpriced land. I don't think so. Landowners need to come back to earth on pricing because it's just not moving. Not only is it nearly impossible to finance, not just the purchase of the land, but the important part is the construction that comes after. Those are generally two different loans. now there's an abundance of land on the market to choose from, and it's just sitting there, so you're competing with more motivated sellers than there were in 21 and 22. And if it's not easy to finance, it's hard to sell, right? That's just a rule of commercial real estate. If it's hard to finance, it's going to be hard to sell. Park Place by the Congress Group. This is what we talked about at the top of the show with the developer. Congress Group did the Four Seasons, right? This is the project they planned in 2021, a 3-story development near the Four Seasons. They paid $35 million for the dirt. Last year, Congress Group revealed that the New York-based Equinox Hotels would be the brand to anchor one of the towers, and a $25 million pre-development bridge loan was secured for the project. The latest, Park Place is on hold as the Congress Group continues to seek construction financing. A 3-tower Sobro project on the former Cumulus site. The developer named Centrum Realty. This was planned in 2021. They paid $34 million for the former Cumulus Media headquarters site, spanning 3.37 acres at 200 2nd Avenue South. They planned 2 residential towers, one with 32 stories and the second with 39 stories, in addition to a 29-story hotel. The project faced some initial setbacks due to legal disputes, and in 2025, Centrum listed the property for sale. The latest, Centrum has not sold the property, which still holds the former Cumulus Media office building, as well as a surface parking lot. Quote, with ongoing apartment absorption, we believe there is an opportunity to develop this site in the near term, they said. 133 KVB, Korean Veterans Boulevard. This is a project by Tishman Speyer, which you could probably say not only is one of the biggest developers nationally, maybe in the world. They planned this in 2021. They were to include 2 49-story towers. They paid $37 million. The latest, no physical progress has been made on the site in years, and no permits have been issued for the project. The Sinclair by GBT Realty Corp., their second time on this list. This is a local developer. This was a project planned in 2021. They planned a 27-story tower called the Sinclair, slated to rise on a prime site at the corner of West End Avenue and Elliston Place. They paid over $10 million for the site in separate transactions. They previously envisioned an apartment project there. The tower is now planned to offer hotel rooms and condos. The idea is it's hard to finance apartments right now because the new apartment situation is that more were built and they're waiting for demand to catch up. So there's stop giving so many concessions, stop giving so much rent abatement. They want to see some strength in the apartment market downtown before these guys are going to start lending on that type of project again. So they're moving away from those type of uses to those uses that can be financed, which are hotel rooms and condos. The latest, the property was cleared years ago, but no physical progress has been made since then. Station East, we're almost done. Bear with me here. I think this is an important lesson for a lot of people to learn. Station East, RMR Group, pitched in 2022. They had plans for an 18-acre mixed-use development on the former East Bank truck stop site, 1,400 residential units, 1.2 million square feet of office space. The project start date was on hold due to evolving infrastructure plans on the East Bank, specifically plans for the James Robertson Parkway. The latest, groundbreaking has not yet occurred. Midtown Towers by Rohr's Company, planned in 2022. 5 towers, all residential, at 3 different development sites in Midtown. They paid a collective $15 million for only one of the 3 project sites, sold it 2 years later. The firm never purchased the other properties where it had pitched these properties. The latest, the company is no longer pursuing any of these projects. St. Regis by Turnberry out of Florida, pitched in 2024. They are the developer behind Nashville's JW Marriott. They announced plans to develop a St. Regis hotel with 177 hotel rooms and 11 condo units. The 39-story tower was slated to rise on land neighboring the JW Marriott that they already own. They already own the land. They still can't get the building out of the ground. It was expected to break ground last year, the latest. There has been no physical progress. So I think that speaks to real challenges in ground-up development in Nashville at this time. You know, it is an extremely difficult business to be in. Extremely difficult. I've got nothing but respect for those guys that have the balls to get into the development business, especially vertical development like that, where you're carrying $20 million of land for years before a shovel gets in the ground. You know, I just don't know how you can sleep at night. I certainly couldn't do it. But I think I've made my point there. You know, the era of high-priced land is over. The moment has passed. Land has to trade at a price that makes sense for the development that will be built there today. And the price that was paid for a lot of those trophy sites years ago, I think it's going to be quite a while before we see prices paid like that again. And it probably is going to be a direct result of the ability to finance those purchases. Let's keep moving. Fifth Third Center tenant sues the new tower owners. A longtime tenant of downtown's Fifth Third Center is suing the new owner of the tower as its conversion into a hotel ramps up. Reno and Kavanaugh is alleging several breaches of the law firm's office lease due to construction related to the conversion of the office tower. The lawsuit claims several breaches of the lease, including the building being an active construction and demolition zone, the loss of use of common areas, and suppressive noise conditions. Reno and Kavanaugh's Nashville office has been located in the building for more than 18 years. They occupy 8,200 square feet on the 29th floor. The lease is not set to expire until 2037. Ouch. The buyer paid $55 million for the property, which was a 62% discount from the last price paid of $144 million in 2019. A 489-room hotel is planned there. Quote, the defendants bought the building with the specific intention of forcing Reno to move. When Reno refused to move unless the defendants made Reno whole for the damages associated with relocating its law firm against its will, the defendants elected to proceed with their plans anyway, using the construction noise and other substantial inconveniences to make the building unusable as office space, and thus coerce Reno into moving or accepting a termination payment far less than Reno's actual damages, right? So let's take a little break from the story. I'll tell you a story of my own. I've been through this, right? You know, we've had office space in an historic office building, right? And my company actually occupied the building with one of our offices. We provided property management services for the owner of the building, and we were the brokerage that sold the building to the next buyer. The next buyer wanted to turn this historic office building into a form of low-income housing, right? Can't remember all the details of what they called, but the idea was for it to be affordable apartments, right? One of the tenants in that property, the penthouse tenant, had recently re-upped their lease and had substantial balance left on the lease. Let's call it 10 years. That tenant refused to move, just like this one, right? That tenant refused to move. They went through the entire court process because the developer needed to get started, right? So they got approval from the court to get started on their project, their conversion project, but the court said, we're going to have to settle how much you're going to pay that tenant later. So get started with your project, and then we'll start the court process to determine how much you owe that tenant for displacing them when they have a legally binding lease for the space. And it took, I don't know if it took a year, maybe it took more than a year, But that little space, which was a fraction of the size of the one that we're discussing today, I believe that the court eventually found in favor of the tenant, and I think the finding was over $1 million. Which was, I can't exactly remember what the price of the entire building was, but let's say the price of the entire building was $2 million. They went out and lost the lawsuit and had to pay the tenant another million on top of that after, going through the entire full scale process of converting an historic office building into apartments. So I don't know how that ultimately settled itself out. I don't know if that tenant ultimately collected that money, but I do know this is an extremely difficult position for the property owner to be in. If you've got a legally binding lease, you have to honor the conditions of that lease. And if you choose not to and start causing problems like this one is, there's going to be a bill to pay later. So it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, this is a whole different price point, right? We're talking about a $55 million building that last traded for almost $145 million. So maybe $1 million at the end of this doesn't kill the transaction. But that would be the equivalent of this deal. The judge deciding that the new owners have to pay the tenant $25 million in damages, right? So it was, in the story that I'm telling, it was an astronomical price that was granted by the court to the tenant. So this is and we were right in the middle of all of this. Very, very uncomfortable time. All right, let's keep going. We'll finish this one up. Persistent loud pounding, drilling, and other demolition noises repeatedly during business hours, which have been heard throughout the premises, at times reaching over 82 decibels. This level of noise experienced in Reno's offices has at times been louder than a freight train from 50 feet away. That's the kind of stuff where, the court hears that. And, man, if you're the landlord, you're sweating. The front lobby now resembles a plywood-lined rodent's maze in a psychological experiment rather than the marble-walled open lobby it once was. I mean, my man is good with words. Reno and Kavanaugh is requesting the landlord's obligation to lease, an injunction against the conversion of the office building into a hotel, and unspecified payment and damages stemming from breaches of the lease. So, the new owners of the Fifth Third Center have got their hands full there. And ultimately, I imagine that is going to settle. I imagine the payout is going to be substantial. Who knows how they come up with the money to pay it out? I mean, I don't think you can take it from your construction financing. I mean, are the owners of the building going to have to pass the hat and throw their own money in the hat to pay these guys off to put this to bed? I don't know. But I do know I've been through it before, and it's a very, very difficult thing to do. But if the landlord and the tenant, right, can't come to an agreement on the price the landlord has to pay for the tenant to agree to terminate their lease, the landlord's in a tough spot then, because they can't delay the entire project. The entire project is costing them money every month. They've got to get started with the renovation. As they're renovating, then they've got to go back and deal with the problem tenant. And if they can't figure it out on their own, they end up in a court of law. You end up in a court of law, and all of a sudden that number can just be totally and completely outrageous. And then you've got to figure out how you're going to pay for it, because I'm not sure how you finance it. Any type of agreement with that tenant is probably going to have to be paid in cash from the principals that own it, which is just a real tough spot to be in. So we're gonna pick up the pace now. Those were two of the longer stories of the show. New York City real estate titan seeks to sell a Midtown property. A Midtown building owned by a New York-based real estate investment giant and which houses an entertainment business management company called FBMN, has listed for sale for an undisclosed asking price. I would tell you, I hate the idea of undisclosed asking prices. If I'm the seller of a piece of property, I want everyone to know what my pricing expectations are. I don't want them to be secret. I don't want them to be hard to get. I don't want there to be a gatekeeper. You know, the knock on this is, right? The skeptic says, the only reason that one would not publicly announce their asking price to make it easy on buyers, right, is because the broker wants to have additional conversations with those buyers that they can then flip into clients of their own, right? So you're forcing people to talk to you, and then you're trying to flip them into business besides the deal that you're working on. That's what a skeptic is saying about non-disclosed asking prices. Uh, you know, I just don't like them. Buyers don't like them. I don't like them. But let's keep moving. This property located at 2300 Charlotte Avenue. It's part of the overall Sheds on Charlotte development. It sits on 1.1 acres. The seller owns the two parcel property, having paid $47.5 million in, get this, 2022, right? So I see this as this 2300 Charlotte Avenue deal. This is being sold for its land value for development, right? The other portion of this site that they paid $47 million for was already completed. This was kind of a phase two, right? So while there is a building there, the value really isn't in that building or that tenant. The value is in the underlying 1.1 acres. So having overpaid for it in 2022, now they're taking that 1.1 acres to the market to see if they can get out from under it. The aforementioned FBMM, which stands for Flood, Bumstead, McGreedy, and McCarthy, is the Sheds on Charlotte anchor tenant. It was founded in 1990. FBMM also operates an office in New York. The for sale building offers about 31,000 square feet. The building offers an exceptional owner-user, or get this, redevelopment opportunity in Midtown and high visibility on one of the city's most active corridors. So another 2022 purchase that was paid for a sky-high price comes back to the market. Let's keep moving. Dallas-based Lucid Private Offices establishes a presence in Midtown and offers refined environment to clients. So this is another co-working center. I find co-working particularly interesting because I used to be in the co-working business. I own two different co-working centers, which I ultimately sold. I will tell you that I thought it was a difficult business with limited upside, right? So you've got high overhead and limited upside. So it's one of those businesses where you aren't really making a profit. If let's say we're talking about that last 10%, right? You've got the first 90% of the money that comes in, it goes to all your overhead. That last 10% of money that comes in at the end of the month, that's what you get to keep for a profit or as an owner. I just thought, there's just not enough upside for all of the downside risk with that recurring revenue, right? Because it shouldn't be recurring expenses, because as a co-working center, you're a tenant, right? You are paying a landlord rent. You are providing all of these services. You are providing internet, utilities, cleaning, furnishing, access to printers, receptionists, you know, uh, conference rooms, kitchenettes, activities. All of this is what you're paying. And at the end of the day, you're charging your subtenants for use of their individual spaces. And you hope that all of your subtenant rent adds up to being more than all of the rent that you have to pay your landlord and all those other operating expenses. And you make the spread. It's a difficult business to be in, especially if you're hoping to lease big blocks of spaces, right? If you want to lease 10 private offices to the same company, right? That's all fine and good until they give notice to vacate, and all of a sudden you're underwater, right? Your revenue is no longer exceeding your recurring expenses, and now you're losing money until you can backfill all those offices. And I will tell you, it's rare that a co-working center is ever full, right? So you're operating below full occupancy, right? But your expenses are what they are, right? The only thing that really changes is how many offices you have leased that particular month. And that's what's going to decide what your profits look like, if there are any. So it's interesting to me, at least, that there are still co-working centers tackling that business. This is the first Tennessee location at the 1801 West End building. It's a massive space, 32,000 square feet, 2 floors, one of the largest co-working offerings in all of Nashville. Lucid Private Offices offers rentable, customizable, fully furnished workspaces on flexible terms, including individual offices, team suites, meeting rooms, and hot desks. Hot desk means shared desks. You just kind of sit down and use that space as you see fit. Once you get up, someone else can take it, kind of like working at um, a Starbucks, but without all the annoying noise and all the liberals behind the counter. They have locations in Dallas, Houston, Phoenix, and Atlanta, with about 30 locations total. It traces its roots all the way back to 2001, when it was then known as Meridian Business Centers. The company rebranded as Work Suites in 2018, and then rebranded again to the more premium Lucid Private Offices in 2022. Quote, Midtown is an incredible location for our future members, said Lucid Private Offices CEO and founder. It is highly accessible from the interstate and major arteries like West End, a perfect middle ground for commutes, meetings, and connectivity throughout Nashville. So 32,000 square foot, high-end co-working center comes to Nashville. I guess the real story is, it's hard to believe that those concepts still pencil out. Maybe I just didn't do a very good job. Maybe they've got it figured out. But I would imagine that for the numbers to work, those individual offices have to be priced sky high. You know, back when I was in that business, my biggest competitor was WeWork. If you remember WeWork. And the problem with WeWork was they were operating almost all of their locations at a loss. So they had artificially low office rents, knowing that those artificially low rents were going to cause a loss. But they were so well capitalized, they could absorb all those losses for so long. So they were actually a very difficult competitor, because they didn't care if they lost money. So you kind of had to compete with their pricing, even though, you know, you weren't in a position to lose money. So the world has changed in the co-working space. WeWork, to my knowledge, is no longer, or if they are, they're very much downsized to the few locations that are actually profitable. But anyway, let's keep going. Nashville entrepreneur launches OneTap, a commercial repair platform. I love this idea. You know, back in the day when I owned a property management business, we did a lot of property maintenance. You know, it became real obvious to me how inefficient it is to schedule repairs of commercial properties, right? And this guy, a local man, is trying to solve for that using technology, right? Maintenance industry veteran Eric Schell launched OneTap, an AI-powered on-demand repair platform geared towards commercial properties in Nashville. OneTap is designed to streamline repairs and maintenance for restaurants, bars, and other commercial properties, taking aim at the maintenance industry, which is oftentimes slow, expensive, and fragmented. There are 2 ways to submit a repair request through OneTap. The first is through the OneTap app, where owners can submit, review, and approve or deny repair requests from anywhere. The second is through the request tag, a near-field communication device that can be installed on site. One Tap's custom AI asks a focused series of questions to diagnose the issue, scope the job, and generate an instant estimate for approval. Once approved, landlords can choose from 4 service speeds ranging from emergency, meaning less than 24 hours, to standard, meaning 7 to 14 days. The right technician is then matched to the job based on the speed selected. The platform is geared towards restaurant owners, short-term rental hosts, and small business owners. One Tap flips the model that has kept skilled technicians underpaid for decades. Rather than handing techs a fraction of what a job generates after overhead eats the rest, One Tap automates the operational work entirely and passes those savings directly to the people doing the actual work that matters. Technicians on One Tap accept or decline jobs on their own schedule and build a reputation. So the reason this is a really smart idea, right? The the challenge for this is, how do you get the technicians to play along, right? How do you find the guys that can actually repair this stuff? I mean, I think these are probably going to be independent repairman or very small maintenance shops. You know, I don't think the bigger shops are going to be renting their technicians out through this app. So you're looking at guys that are kind of like Uber drivers, right? Whereby they can operate their own business on their own, select what jobs they want, which jobs they don't want. You know, the challenge is getting those technicians involved in the platform, right? Which makes this smart, right? Because they are, their kind of motivating principle here is that these skilled technicians are overpaid, right? These jobs are expensive, but the skilled technicians are underpaid rather, right? So most of the payment is going to overhead and not till the actual technicians. So the idea is this app is going to cut out the middleman and pass more of the actual cost of the job on to the skilled technician, which I imagine is music to the skilled technician's ears, right? That gets skilled technicians excited and willing to participate. So I do think the motivating principle of this is wise because it solves for the major obstacle here, which is actually getting technicians involved. And then you've kind of got to scale it in a reasonable way, right? So if a technician signs up to participate in this app, but there's only 1 or 2 requests a month because you're just getting going, you're going to lose those technicians. So you've got to get demand from the property owner side and you've got to get demand from the technician side all at the same time so it can kind of snowball forward and you aren't losing people, right? So I think it's a awesome idea. I think um, it's easier to come up with the idea than it is to execute the idea. You know, so the execution part is going to be truly the difficult part, more difficult than building the app itself. Um, but it sounds like he's up to it, right? So I wish them well. I think that's an awesome idea. Another quick one for you. Capital View's Radius building has been listed for sale. It was last acquired in 2021 for $95 million. Capital View's Radius building, which houses Oracle Corp's temporary operations, among other businesses, has been listed for sale for another undisclosed asking price. Gotta love it. 601 11th Avenue North, 9 floors, previously called Lifeway Plaza, and accommodated the offices of Lifeway, which of course has now been relocated to Brentwood. It's 265,000 square foot building, but it seems to me that the major tenant there, Oracle, is very temporary in nature. So it's interesting that now is when one would choose to list that property for sale, you know, knowing that its anchor tenant or one of its most important tenants at minimum is very, very temporary in nature. So it'd be interesting to see how that plays out. You know, 95 million in 2021, remember, 2021. Anytime you hear 2022, you got to think, well, they might have overpaid for that property, right? So we're about to see if they overpaid for that property in 2021 at $95 million, taking it to the market with an anchor tenant that's very temporary in nature. So we'll see how that plays out. A site has been found for the Nate Bargatze theme park. This is a fun story. Address for the future site has not been announced, but the project is supposed to cost all in $350 million. The site is located within the Nashville metro area, with Nateland Experiences having landed an investor to acquire the property. Nateland will offer 3 sections. So this is 3 different sections of an amusement park. This is interesting. One section is based on Bargatze's Tennessee upbringing. One section is based on his experiences in New York City, and one section is based on the comics' growing fame globally, right? Which is also, I suppose you can just say, a Tennessee section, a New York City section, and a world section is probably an easier way to define that. The future theme park is expected to cover about 100 acres. They are working with Los Angeles-based Storyland Studios, which designs theme parks. In addition to the family-centric park, Nateland amenities could include retail, restaurants, and a hotel. Did you know Nate Bargatze in 2024 was the highest grossing comedian in the country that year? My man made more money than anybody else in 2024. You know, I don't know him real well. I know of him. I know he's a clean comic, right? So he doesn't do dirty jokes, doesn't cuss. Um, so to, maybe I don't know if that's helps or hurts. Maybe it helps. I mean, if you're the top grossing guy in 2024, maybe it helps. My instincts are saying that it hurts. It makes it harder to make people laugh, but perhaps the proof is in the pudding here. He's had various interviews where he said he enjoyed visiting Opryland, USA as a youth, which is kind of motivating this. The former Nashville theme park, which offered various rides and music-themed shows, operated on 120 acres hugging the Cumberland River and off of Briley Parkway in East Davidson County from 1972 to 1997. Retail center Opry Mills now operates at that site. So Nateland is kind of a new, improved Opry Land USA. So I hope that keeps moving forward. That's one of those very ambitious things that you probably assign a real low probability of success to. Maybe it's 30% that gets done. But it was probably 10% 6 months ago. So it's trending in the right direction. I've got 3 short stories for you here, and we're going to wrap this thing up. Sobro Restaurant, the Rutledge, closes. So this is in the ground floor of the Four Seasons, which we've spoken about a few times already in the show. This is a retail condo. So that Four Seasons building is just a series of condos. There's retail condos on the ground floor. There are individual condos that people own and live in on upper floors. And then there's this big block of hotel rooms, which is one big hotel condo, right? So this is the retail condo. It's been listed for sale after the Rutledge closed in April, listed for sale for a whopping $16.5 million for the 15,626 square foot 2-story retail condo. The owners of the Rutledge paid $10.5 million for what I believe to be the shell of that condo in 2022. Again, 2022, be careful. So I think they paid $10.5 million for the shell. Don't quote me on that. I'm pretty sure that's true, right? So then you have to completely build it out, and it's a very, very high-end build out, very nicely done. It's just an enormous space, and I'm not sure how much traffic you're really getting in that location if people aren't already down there and in the area. I don't think it's a destination location. I certainly haven't been there before, haven't had a reason to. quote, "We have an amazing asset, and we feel like this is a good time to focus on the continued growth of our other Jonathan's Grill restaurants." Right? Jonathan's Grill is the best. One of our family's favorites. They also just opened a brand new location off of Old Hickory in Brentwood in the Maryland Farms area, if you know where that is. There's another very near the mall in Cool Springs, which is where our family goes. The offering is over $1,000 per square foot. The brothers first opened the Rutledge in Cool Springs in 2019, which is hard to believe because 2019 seems like a long time ago. And I recall taking my wife to the Rutledge in Cool Springs, just she and I, just to see what it was like. And it wasn't really our style. It was kind of like a fluorescent nightclub martini bar type spot. And of course, we don't drink, so we were just kind of a fish out of water in there. Um, so we never returned. It must be doing okay. It's still operating, but it seems it's got kind of like a nightclub vibe to it. I don't remember anything about the food. I just remember the vibe not being a fit for us. Very decadent, very over the top. Shoot, we got 4 kids, 2 cats, and a dog. I'm not decadent or over the top, and I'm certainly not trying to buy a martini at this stage of life. So not for me. When I heard they were going there, I thought, oh man, that's going to be an uphill battle. I think I turned out to be correct on that. I hope they can get out from under it without losing too much money. That asking price they've got there, that might be real close to the total amount of money they've got invested in that property between the purchase price, the furnishing, the fit out, the losses that they had to take to get that thing open. They might need 15 million just to break even on what they've got into it already. And those guys are real nice guys. Those are local guys that I've met before. Um, so I'm wishing them well. I think they're doing very, very well with their Jonathan's Grill's properties, which continue to expand. If you haven't eaten at Jonathan's Grill, that is a very high quality place to eat. Very good food, very cool menu. Prices aren't low, but they aren't crazy. Food comes out fast. Comfortable dining rooms. It's not hoity-toity. There's a separate bar area that's kept away from all the folks that are just sitting with their children. Jonathan's Grill is one of my favorites. We were just there recently, as a matter of fact. 2 more stories. A landlord won't renew an ICE lease. In addition, he says he's going to donate all the profits from said lease after facing backlash earlier this year for leasing a Nashville office space to ICE's legal advisory branch. Real estate company Freeman Webb president and state rep Bob Freeman, of course a Democrat, met with the Metro Council Immigrant Caucus, who knew that was a thing, and has agreed not to renew the lease. They are taking a stand against ICE by donating the profits from the lease and refusing to renew it. Freeman has also said he will donate the lease profits to an immigrant rights organization. Okay. 2 white guys taking a stand against the federal government's ICE division. The Office of the Principal Legal Advisor, which is the branch of ICE that handles immigration court proceedings. Freeman Webb offered to cover relocation costs if the tenant agreed to terminate the lease and relocate, but the offer was declined. It was an easy yes, Freeman said, of agreeing to the caucus's terms. Freeman said he regularly donates to immigrant rights groups, including the Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Rights Coalition, and will continue to support such organizations. Man, these Democrats have really taken a stand. No leasing to the federal government. Donate all the profits to immigrants. Okay. All right. I'm going to leave that one alone. I'm not in the mood to talk about that one. Let's keep moving. Last story. This will be a quick one. Bridgestone Tower sells for a whopping $255 million. Located at 204th Avenue South. It is 445 feet tall. The 31-story high-rise opened in 2017 and is Nashville's 8th tallest building. The new owner is San Francisco-based commercial real estate company Drawbridge Realty, which has made its initial foray in the Nashville market with the acquisition. The seller, Raleigh-based Highwoods Properties, who has a big, they own many properties in Williamson County, for example. One of the largest office building owners in Williamson County. Highwoods Properties was the seller of the 513,000 square foot mixed use property. I don't know why they do that, okay? It's an office building that has a restaurant on the ground floor. When did that become a mixed use building? That's an office building. Every office building's got a restaurant on the ground floor. So there's no such thing as office buildings anymore. They don't even want you to put offices on the ground floor. You know, most municipalities require you have retail uses on the ground floor, whether you want them or not. A lot of times they don't want them, especially in apartment buildings. They don't want retail uses on the ground floor. The municipalities make them, right? So is that a mixed use building because there's retail on the ground floor and apartments everywhere else? We got carried away with the term mixed use. The property is fully leased to Bridgestone Americas, right, which is the largest subsidiary of Bridgestone Corp. Did you know that Bridgestone Corp is actually not an American company? It is headquartered in Japan and a publicly traded manufacturer of tires and rubber. Bridgestone Corp, a Japanese company. I'm not sure I knew that. Well, y'all, that was a long show. I didn't know what we were getting ourselves into there. You know, I tried to provide a little value. We had a heck of a time getting the technology to work. I think it's about 90 degrees in the room we're shooting this. So this has been a real challenge getting this information out to y'all today. I hope it's been appreciated. I hope there's been a little value added. I hope we've gotten to know each other a little bit better. As always, if you are a commercial property owner in Nashville or the Southeast, you're considering selling your property, you'd like to know exactly what it would look like to list and sell in today's marketplace with no high pressure selling, please reach out to us. Please reach out to me directly. I'd be happy to have a conversation at your convenience. Thanks so much. Until next time.